The evening Patricia Crane pulled her Subaru Forester into the space directly in front of my garage door for the 47th time and left it there while she attended a 3-hour book club at the house 2 doors down. I was in my workshop finishing the calibration on a moisture sensor array I had been building for a precision agriculture client. And when my driveway camera sent the alert, I looked at the phone screen for approximately 5 seconds, noted the timestamp, added it to the documentation log that had been running for 11 months, and went back to the calibration because the sensor array had a deadline and the documentation was current, and the structural solution was already designed and permitted and sitting in my materials list waiting for me to place the order. My name is Calvin Marsh. I am 46 years old, a licensed electrical and systems engineer with 18 years of experience in sensor systems, precision measurement infrastructure, and automated monitoring, and I have lived in the Cedarwood Heights HOA development in Central Tennessee for 4 years. My wife Nadia is a physical therapist. Our house is a 4-bedroom contemporary on a corner lot with a 2-car garage at the rear of the property accessed by a concrete driveway that runs from Sycamore Avenue along the northern property edge to the garage, 44 feet long, 14 feet wide, with a paved apron in front of the garage doors that provided enough space for a vehicle to park without blocking the garage. The parking apron in front of the garage was the problem, or more accurately, the problem was that Patricia Crane had decided the parking apron in front of my garage was a convenient extension of the available parking on Sycamore Avenue during neighborhood social events, and had been acting on that decision for 11 months. Patricia lived one house north on Sycamore Avenue. She was 57, recently retired from a career in corporate communications, and she drove a Subaru Forester in a metallic blue shade that I could identify on camera at 300 feet. Her lot had a standard 2-car driveway that accommodated her Forester and her husband Gerald's pickup without difficulty under normal circumstances. The difficulty arose when Patricia hosted or attended social gatherings that drew additional vehicles to the block, at which point the available street parking filled, and Patricia's solution was to park her Forester in front of my garage doors because it was adjacent to the street and the apron was wide and flat and convenient. She had been doing this for 11 months. I had established the pattern through camera installation in month 2 and had confirmed it through documentation that showed 47 incidents, all correlated with neighborhood social events, Patricia's hosting schedule, and the street parking occupancy visible in the camera frame. She was not parking there randomly. She was parking there when the street was full, and the gathering she was attending was more than 3 houses away from her own driveway. I had spoken to Patricia about it in month 3. She had been warm and apologetic and had said she had not realized it was a problem and would find alternative arrangements. The camera showed her Forester in my apron 9 days later during a neighborhood potluck. I had left a written note on month 5. Month 6 had produced 2 incidents. Month 7 had produced a formal HOA complaint. The HOA sent Patricia a notice. Month 7 still produced 3 incidents. I had retained my attorney Karen Aldrich in month 8 after the 3rd notice period incident. Karen had sent a formal letter. Patricia had called me after receiving it and had been warm in the specific way of someone who genuinely liked me as a neighbor and genuinely did not connect that warmth to any obligation to change behavior, which is a specific type of person I had encountered before and which I had learned produced no lasting result from appeals to the relationship. Months 9, 10, and 11 had produced 9 more incidents and the total of 47. In month 10, I had designed the structural solution and pulled the permit. In month 11, I had placed the materials order. In the first week of month 12, on a Thursday, I placed the order for our trip to Asheville. Nadia and I had been planning the trip since the previous spring. 4 days in Asheville, hiking in the mornings, downtown in the evenings, 1 day to the Blue Ridge Parkway. We had wanted to go for 2 years and had deferred once for a family obligation and once for a work conflict. I had told Nadia in October that this was the year and that I intended to complete the structural solution before we left so the concrete would be cured and the system operational before we returned. The system was the element that made my solution different from the other driveway solutions in this collection and reflected my professional background in sensor systems and automated monitoring. I will describe the structural component first because it was foundational. Two concrete pillars at the entrance to my garage apron, positioned at the property line where the driveway met the garage approach, each pillar 18 inches square and 40 inches tall with concrete masonry unit cores filled with structural grout and a brick veneer in the same clay body as my house exterior. A steel gate between the pillars, hinged on removable pins at the western pillar, padlocked at the eastern pillar. County permitted, HOA notified, Karen reviewed. This was the standard structural solution that had appeared in various forms throughout this collection, and I had designed it correctly. What I had added was the systems component. My professional work involved building monitoring and sensor systems for precision applications. The systems I installed were not the standard residential camera and motion alert setup that every other solution in this collection had used. My system was a purpose-designed monitoring array with 4 cameras at different angles covering the approach, the apron, and the gate, a license plate recognition module that logged every vehicle that appeared in the monitored zone with timestamp and plate capture, a gate sensor that logged every attempt to engage the gate, whether by vehicle contact, manual force, or tool, and an environmental sensor package that logged temperature, humidity, and precipitation data so that every incident in the log had full environmental context. The system uploaded to a dedicated cloud account I had set up for the purpose, backed up to 2 separate locations, and sent me formatted alert reports rather than raw push notifications, because formatted reports are more useful for documentation purposes than notification logs, and I was building this for documentation from the start. I had also added one element that was specific to this situation and that I want to describe carefully because it was the most technically interesting part of the design. I had installed a vehicle presence sensor embedded in the concrete of the apron surface, a loop detector of the type used in commercial parking systems, positioned at the apron entrance where a vehicle approaching the garage doors would pass over it. The loop detector fed into my monitoring system and logged every vehicle presence event in the apron with a duration measurement. If Patricia or anyone else drove into my apron after the gate was installed, the gate would physically prevent her from reaching the apron position she had been using. But if the gate was somehow bypassed, or if someone approached from the alley, the loop detector would log the presence event with duration, and the system would alert me. Karen had reviewed the full system design before I finalized it. She said, "You are building a monitoring system for your driveway." I said, "I am building a documentation system that captures vehicle presence events at my private property with precision sufficient for legal purposes." She said, "Most people use a camera." I said, "Cameras capture images. My system captures images plus plate recognition plus gate interaction data plus environmental context plus presence sensor events in a unified log with consistent timestamps. The documentation quality is considerably higher." She said, "You are building this because you expect the situation to continue." I said, "I am building this because I want the documentation to be complete regardless of what happens. If Patricia never approaches my apron again after the gate goes in, the system will show 0 incidents, and I will have spent some engineering time and materials on a system that was not needed. If she finds a way around the gate, or sends Gerald, or uses the alley approach, the system will document it with the same completeness as the prior incidents." She said, "You anticipated the alley approach." I said, "I read the account of a situation where someone used an alley approach in a similar context. I designed for it." She said, "Which account?" I said, "I have been reading this collection carefully." She said she appreciated the thoroughness and told me to proceed. Construction took one Saturday. The pillars went in correctly. The gate was fabricated from 4-inch square tube with flat bar infill and hung level on the first attempt. The loop detector installation required cutting 2 slots in the existing concrete and installing the detector wire in the correct pattern, which took longer than the structural work, but was within my skill set. The camera system went up in 3 hours. The environmental sensor package took 45 minutes. I tested the full system for 3 days before the trip. Every component performed within specification. The gate logged correctly. The loop detector logged correctly. The plate recognition module identified my truck and Nadia's car correctly on 9 of 10 approach passes, with the one miss occurring at an extreme angle that a vehicle using the apron for its intended purpose would not use. Satisfactory performance for the application. We left for Asheville on a Thursday morning. I checked the system from the car on the way to the highway and everything was running. The camera feeds were active. The environmental log was recording. The gate was locked. The first alert came Saturday evening, which was our second night in Asheville. We were at dinner at a restaurant downtown when my phone showed a formatted alert notification. I opened it at the table. The alert showed a plate recognition event at 6:47, Patricia's Forester plate, which I had added to the monitored plate list when I set up the system. The camera feed showed her Forester approaching the apron entrance and stopping at the gate. Gate interaction log showed 2 contact events, meaning she had nudged the gate with the front bumper twice. Duration at the blocked entrance was 6 minutes and 14 seconds. Departure direction north toward her house. There was a neighborhood dinner party that evening. The street camera showed 5 vehicles parked on Sycamore Avenue in positions consistent with a gathering 2 houses down. I showed Nadia the alert at the table. She said it worked. I said first real operational test. All 5 sensors logged correctly. The gate interaction was captured from 3 angles. The plate recognition fired correctly. The environmental data shows clear dry conditions, which is relevant for the surface analysis. She said, "You are describing this like a system performance report." I said, "That is what it is." She said, "Is it satisfying?" I said the system performed within specification on first operational use. That is satisfying in the professional sense. She said, "In the human sense." I said, "I am eating an excellent dinner in Asheville with you while Patricia Crane sits outside my gate for 6 minutes and then goes home. That is satisfying in the human sense." She laughed. The waiter came and we ordered dessert. The second alert came Sunday afternoon during our Blue Ridge Parkway drive. Patricia's plate at the apron entrance, 4 minutes and 22 seconds, gate interaction log showing 1 contact event. Departure north. The third alert came Monday evening, our last night in Asheville. This one was different. It was not Patricia's plate. It was a plate the recognition module logged as unknown, meaning it was not in my monitored list, and the vehicle was Gerald Crane's pickup truck based on the camera image. Gerald had come to examine the gate. He was there for 11 minutes based on the system log. The gate sensor showed 3 interaction events, 2 contact events consistent with pushing the gate, and 1 event that the gate sensor classified as rotational, meaning someone had applied torque to the gate at the hinge or lock point. The rotational event was brief, 3 seconds, and did not result in gate opening because the through-bolt lock held. I forwarded the full Monday alert to Karen from the hotel room before we went to dinner. She called the next morning while we were packing. She said, "Gerald Crane attempted to open or force the gate." I said the gate sensor shows a 3-second rotational force event at the lock point. The lock held. The system logged the full interaction, including the plate recognition on his truck. She said, "Do you want me to send a formal notice to both of them before you return?" I said send the notice today. Include the log data from all 3 alert events showing Patricia's 2 approach incidents and Gerald's gate interaction. Make clear that the gate interaction constitutes an attempted forced entry to a locked access control structure on private property. She sent the notice that afternoon. Gerald called Karen's office number rather than mine the following morning. Karen took the call and described it to me afterward. Gerald had been apologetic in the way of someone who had been told by his attorney that a 3-second rotational force event on a locked private gate had produced a security log entry and wanted to establish that it had not been his intent to force the gate. Karen told him it was noted in the record that he had contacted her office and expressed that the gate interaction had not been an intentional forced entry attempt. She told him she would convey this to me and that the record as it stood included a documented interaction that the gate sensor had classified as a force event regardless of intent. Gerald apparently understood this and said he appreciated Karen's professionalism and ended the call. We returned from Asheville on Tuesday afternoon. The system had run continuously for 4 days and produced 3 alert events with complete documentation. Karen filed the expanded civil claim the following week. The claim covered 47 prior documented incidents, the post-installation approach incidents during the trip, Gerald's gate interaction, Karen's fees for the full 11-month period and the 4-day alert period, and compensatory damages. The gate interaction added an element Karen described as attempted interference with a private access control structure that she noted was documented with sensor precision unusual in residential property disputes. Patricia retained Marcus Webb. Marcus called Karen within 10 days. He had reviewed the documentation package, and his voice had the quality Karen described to me as thoughtful, which in her professional assessment meant he had reviewed the sensor logs and the gate interaction data and the plate recognition records, and had understood that this was not the kind of documentation that left room for competing interpretations. Marcus's opening position was $11,000. Karen said the demand was $17,400. Marcus came back with $14,000. Karen said $16,000 was the floor. Marcus said his client would accept $15,500. Karen called me. I said accepted. The settlement was $15,500. Patricia paid $9,000 personally. Her insurance covered $6,500, covering the portion attributable to the documented property intrusion events. The insurance company flagged the claim as unusual due to the sensor-based documentation precision, which Karen said had prompted an interesting conversation with their adjuster about the evidentiary value of loop detector data in residential property disputes. Gerald sent a handwritten note to our house the week after the settlement. The note said he was sorry for the situation and that he should not have touched the gate and that they would not be approaching our property again. The handwriting was careful and the note was brief. I photographed it and added it to the documentation folder and filed the folder in the cabinet where I kept completed project records. The system continued to run, not because I anticipated further incidents, but because I had built it and operational systems run unless you turn them off, and I had no reason to turn it off. The plate recognition module occasionally logged street traffic from the camera's field of view. The environmental sensors logged every temperature and precipitation event. The gate sensor had logged 0 interaction events since Gerald's visit. Nadia came into my workshop a week after the settlement while I was reviewing the system performance logs as part of my routine maintenance check. She stood behind me and looked at the screen. She said, "You are reviewing the sensor logs." I said, "Monthly performance check. All components within specification. 0 anomalous events since the gate interaction." She said, "Calvin." I said, "Yes." She said, "You built a commercial parking monitoring system for our residential driveway." I said, "I built a documentation system appropriate to the monitoring requirements of the situation using tools and techniques within my professional skill set." She said, "You have a loop detector in our driveway apron." I said, "Loop detectors are the most reliable vehicle presence sensing technology available. Far more reliable than camera-based presence detection for the specific measurement I needed." She said, "You knew that before you started." I said, "I have been working with loop detector systems for 12 years. She said, "Of course you have." She sat down in the second chair. She said, "Did it solve the problem?" I said, "Patricia has not approached the apron since the Monday gate interaction incident, which is consistent with 0 anomalous events in the post-settlement log period." She said, "That is not what I asked." I said, "I know." I turned from the screen and looked at her. She looked at me. I said, "It solved the problem." The gate is there, and the system is running, and Patricia parks on the street or in her own driveway, and we use our garage apron for what it is for, and the documentation is filed, and the settlement is paid. She said, "Is that enough?" I said I spent 11 months asking someone to stop parking in front of our garage. She did not stop. I built a gate and a monitoring system, and she stopped. Yes, it is enough. It was always going to be enough when the problem was solved. She said, "The loop detector is going to be in our driveway forever." I said, "It is embedded in the concrete. It would require cutting the slab to remove it." She said, "So yes." I said, "The loop detector is a functioning component of our property's access monitoring system. It will be there when we sell the house, and I will disclose it as a feature, and some buyers will consider it an improvement." She said, "Some buyers." I said, "Buyers who understand sensor systems." She said, "How many of those are there in this zip code?" I said, "More than you might expect." She laughed. I went back to the performance log. The system was running correctly. All sensors were within specification. The gate was locked. The documentation was complete. Everything was as it should be. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. Thumbnail text: She parked in front of his garage 47 times. A sensor engineer built a monitoring system with a loop detector. She never got in again.